There was once a young man named Leo. He lived his life like a chameleon. He changed his colors to match every room he entered. If his friends loved sports, he would cheer for their favorite team. He learned all the players' names. He wore the team jersey. He did this even if he preferred a quiet afternoon with a book. With his family, he was the person they wanted him to be. He pursued the career they thought was stable. He followed the path they laid out for him. He believed that making them happy was his purpose. His own dreams were like quiet whispers. He learned to ignore them. He thought this was the right way to live. This desire to please everyone was a heavy coat he wore every day. It felt warm for a moment when someone smiled at him. The praise he received was like a temporary shield. It made him feel seen and accepted. If a colleague said, "Leo, you're so reliable," he would feel a brief sense of pride. He would stay late at the office even when he was exhausted. He would take on extra projects even when his own work piled up. He became the person everyone could count on. But this constant effort was draining. It was like pouring water from his own cup into everyone else's, leaving nothing for himself. He was always giving, but he was never truly full. He measured his worth by the applause of others. His happiness was a reflection in their eyes. If they were pleased, he felt a fleeting sense of joy. But if they were disappointed, he felt a deep sense of failure. This meant he was always on edge. He was constantly guessing what people wanted. He was always trying to meet their unspoken expectations. This constant performance was exhausting. He felt like an actor on a stage, playing a role that was written for him by someone else. The applause would fade, the lights would go down, and he would be left alone with a feeling of emptiness. He had everyone's approval, but he had lost his own. The problem was that the happiness he received was borrowed. It didn't come from within. It came from outside validation. So it never lasted long. It was like a sugar rush that quickly led to a crash. He would get a compliment and feel good for an hour, but then the feeling would disappear. He would need another compliment to feel good again. He was trapped in a cycle of seeking approval. He was running on a treadmill, working hard but going nowhere. He thought he was building connections with people, but in reality, he was building walls around his true self. He was hiding who he really was, afraid that no one would like the real Leo. The turning point did not arrive like a loud thunderstorm. It came as a quiet realization. It happened on his 30th birthday. His friends and family threw him a big party. Everyone was there, celebrating him. They gave speeches about how kind and dependable he was. They praised him for all the things he had done for them. On the surface, it was a perfect celebration. He smiled, he hugged everyone, he said all the right things. But inside, he felt a profound hollowness. He was surrounded by people who loved the version of him he had created, but he felt completely and utterly alone. The person they were celebrating felt like a stranger. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, he stood in front of the mirror. He looked at his own reflection. He saw the tired eyes behind the forced smile. He saw the lines of stress on his forehead. For the first time, he asked himself a simple question: am I happy? The answer was a deafening silence. The silence was more honest than any word he had spoken that day. He realized he had spent his entire life making sure everyone else was comfortable. He had made sure everyone else's needs were met. But he had completely neglected his own. He had built a beautiful life for a character he was playing, but the real Leo was unhappy and lost. This moment was painful, but it was also a gift. It was the moment he finally woke up. He understood that he could not continue living this way. The emptiness he felt was a message from his own heart. It was a cry for help. It was telling him that something was wrong. He had been running away from himself for so long. He had been so busy listening to the voices of others that he had forgotten the sound of his own. The praise from others was like a sweet poison. It made him feel good for a moment, but it was slowly destroying his spirit. He knew he had to make a change. He had to find the courage to disappoint others in order to be true to himself. He realized that his fear of being disliked was a prison. It kept him small. It kept him from exploring his own passions. He had always wanted to be a writer. He loved telling stories. But he had pursued a career in finance because it was considered more practical. He had pushed his dream aside to please his parents. Now, he saw that his dream was not just a hobby, it was a part of who he was. And by ignoring it, he was ignoring a fundamental part of himself. The emptiness he felt was the space where his dreams should have been. It was time to start filling that space with things that brought him genuine joy, not just the approval of others. The journey back to himself began with small, deliberate steps. It was not a sudden transformation. It was a slow and gentle process of learning to listen. He started by saying no. It was one of the hardest words for him to say. The first time he said it, his voice trembled. A colleague asked him to take on an extra project over the weekend. The old Leo would have said yes immediately. But the new Leo paused. He took a deep breath and he said, "I'm sorry, but I can't. I have other plans. The world didn't end." His colleague simply found someone else. It was a revelation. He realized that he could set boundaries and people would respect them. He began to carve out time for himself. He started waking up an hour earlier each morning. He used that time not for work, but for himself. He would sit with a cup of tea and a journal. He would write down his thoughts and feelings. He would ask himself questions. What do I want to do today? What would make me feel good? At first, the pages were filled with confusion. He didn't know what he wanted. He had spent so long focusing on others that he had lost touch with his own desires. But slowly, the answers began to emerge. He started writing stories again, just for himself. He felt a spark of joy he hadn't felt in years. He learned to distinguish between his own voice and the voices of others. When making a decision, he would pause. He would ask himself, is this what I truly want? Or is this what I think someone else wants for me? This practice was like tuning a radio. At first, there was a lot of static. The opinions of his parents, friends, and society were loud. But with practice, he learned to tune into his own frequency. He learned to trust his intuition. He decided to take a writing class, even though some people thought it was a waste of time. For the first time, he was making a choice purely for his own happiness and growth. This process was not always easy. There were moments of guilt. There were times when he felt selfish. He was so used to putting others first that taking care of himself felt strange. Some people in his life did not understand the change. They were used to the old Leo, the one who always said yes. But he learned that true friends would support his journey. They would celebrate his newfound confidence. He was learning that self-care was not selfish. It was necessary. It was about filling his own cup so that he could give to others from a place of abundance, not from a place of emptiness. As Leo continued on this path, his life began to transform in beautiful ways. The constant anxiety that had followed him like a shadow started to disappear. It was replaced by a quiet confidence. He no longer needed everyone to like him. He just needed to like himself. This was a profound shift. His happiness was no longer dependent on external validation. It came from within. It was rooted in his own self-worth. He found joy in simple things. A walk in the park, a good book, a meaningful conversation. He was no longer performing for an audience. He was simply living. And it felt incredibly liberating. His relationships also became more authentic. Because he was being his true self, he attracted people who appreciated him for who he really was. His conversations became deeper. His connections became stronger. He was no longer trying to be the person he thought they wanted him to be. He was just being Leo. And he discovered that the real Leo was more than enough. He even shared his writing with a close friend. He was nervous, but his friend's genuine encouragement gave him the courage to continue. He was building relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, not on a desire to please. The greatest change was the sense of freedom he felt. He was no longer a prisoner of other people's expectations. He was the author of his own life story. He had the power to choose his own path. This didn't mean he stopped caring about others. In fact, he found that he could be a better friend, a better son, and a better colleague. Because he was happy and fulfilled, he had more to give. He could offer support and kindness from a place of genuine strength, not from a place of obligation. He was living his life with purpose, a purpose that came from his own heart. In the end, Leo learned the most important lesson of all. True happiness is not found in the applause of the crowd. It is found in the quiet whisper of your own heart. It starts with self-love, it grows with self-compassion, and it blossoms when you have the courage to be your authentic self. His journey from being a people-pleaser to a self-loving individual was not about becoming perfect. It was about becoming whole. It was about coming home to himself. And in that home, he found a peace and a joy that no amount of external approval could ever provide.